Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Schwalik here, and I would like to welcome you to the Book Club. This is my brand new series where I take a book that I just read and I give a synopsis, and we talk about it. I give you what I liked, what I didn't like, and we talk about the story. I'm thinking it's going to be pretty interesting. I love to read, and this is going to motivate me to read even more, and I hope you all join me. Before we do jump into the very first book, I want to show you something. Check this out. These are all of the books that I have to read. It just keeps going. Yeah, so this is why I started the book club, because I need to finish all of these books and I need your help to do it. So, thanks for joining me. Let's get into our very first book. The first book that we're going to be talking about in the book club is Night by Elie Wiesel. I'm sure most of you have heard about this book. Maybe you read it in school, but it's really popular because it's by a Holocaust survivor. And the story is all about his experience being in Auschwitz and in the different concentration camps during the Holocaust. He was a Jew, and that caused him to have a lot of different trials and tribulations during World War II, and most of them are just unimaginable. He goes through the entire story, his entire experience of being in Auschwitz and all these different concentration camps, being shipped there with his family, getting broken apart, losing his father, almost losing his leg, and all of the pain that he endured and torment that he had to deal with for those 6 years. Honestly, this is a really easy read because Elie is such a fantastic storyteller. You get to know the characters very quickly, you understand the setting quite well, and he leads you on a journey that you can't get enough of because it's so fascinating, the experience and how he explains it. It's only 120 pages. I finished it in 3 days. So if you are looking for an interesting read that won't take you a lot of time and also has historical significance, Night is the book for you. One of the most impactful things actually hit me in the preface of the book. Elie was talking about some of the different cuts and things he had to take out for the different versions that he wrote, and the very first thing that he mentions is that around like the 1960s, he was worried that people were forgetting about the Holocaust. Yeah, how crazy is that? People stopped talking about the war. There were a ton of people that were saying the Holocaust didn't even happen. How insane is that, to actually say the Holocaust did not exist? There was actually a lot of debate around that in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s with people saying it did not exist. There was actually a massive court case that ended up saying, yeah, it did happen and people were persecuted. I cannot even imagine the feeling that you would get surviving the Holocaust, all of that torment and torture, and people were basically saying, yeah, that didn't happen. That would make me feel just disgusting, especially after reading this book and hearing all of the things Elie had to endure. That just makes no sense to me. I actually got physically angry that people would say, no, the Holocaust didn't happen after everything that he went through. That's absolutely disgusting. And I am glad that now our education system teaches the Holocaust and all of the negative things that went along with it in World War II so fervently. Elie, don't worry. We will never forget, and we will never let that happen again. However, the sad part is that genocides still occur, even after all of the terrible things that went on during World War II. We still allow that to happen. And that was one of Elie's points in the book. He said multiple times to his father when he was a kid, this is the 20th century. How is this allowed to happen? And now we're in the 21st century, and we're still allowing it to happen. There are no excuses for that. This book starts off by going through Elie's life as a kid. How he was going to school, how he loved books, how he was studying his faith, and then it slowly went downhill from there after the Germans ended up shoving him and his family and all of his Jewish community members into a ghetto and then eventually transporting them to Auschwitz. That's one of the scariest parts, that you can imagine yourself as Elie, just living a normal life, and then all of a sudden, literally, all hell breaks loose. And many times he mentions in the book, this is what hell would be like if he could imagine it. How sick is it that essentially a 12-year-old gets sent off to a concentration camp, doesn't really know fully what's going on, and one of the first things that happens is you lose your mother and your sisters forever. You don't get to see them anymore because they go off and they don't make it through. You don't get to say goodbye. You don't fully comprehend the situation that's going on. It's absolutely sick. And I still get angry just thinking about all of the experiences he had to go through. Elie does a great job, even though it would be difficult, a great job going through all of the details that he experiences when he initially goes into the concentration camp and as he continues his journey through all of that. He is an amazing writer and is able to depict all of the treacherous and terrible things that go on there. And thankfully he is, so that he's able to tell that story so we can understand in some form what's actually happening there. Because there's no way that we can even empathize with people that have gone through and survived the Holocaust. Because there's just no experience like that we can even compare to that. Elie was there when his father slowly passed away in the concentration camp. He sadly had to watch his father's demise because of the terrible conditions and the poor treatment that they received there. The conditions that the people in these concentration camps had to endure. I know I keep saying this, but it's just disgusting. There's no way that I would have been able to survive in a concentration camp. And honestly, I don't think many people in our generation would be able to survive the Holocaust because we have all of the simple pleasures of life right at our fingertips. We don't necessarily know what true pain is or how to withstand it or endure it. It's kind of scary, to be honest with you, because of the things that Elie and his family went through in that concentration camp when him and his father have to carry on and go through the blizzard after his foot is essentially needing amputated. I would not have survived. I can tell you that right now. I have no possible idea how Elie and his father continued on in those treacherous conditions. It is just absolutely amazing. One thing Elie does mention toward the end of the book is that, like I said, he hurt his foot because they weren't really wearing shoes anymore. It was winter and his foot was swollen. He had to go to the infirmary where he needed to have surgery. He had surgery done and he said, okay, in 2 weeks, I should be good to go. However, that was when the front line was catching up to the Germans and they were going to evacuate camp in 2 days. So Elie needed 2 weeks to recover, but there was only 2 days. So he had to make a choice. He could either stay in the infirmary and wait and potentially see if the Germans would kill off all of the Jews in the concentration camp, which was rumored to be true and what was going to be happening, or try to fight it, take his father, and then go off and make the march to the next concentration camp. He said that him and his father, they made the choice to make the journey to the next concentration camp and take that risk instead of risking their lives by waiting around. However, Elie mentioned that the very next day, the front line got to that concentration camp where he was, and the Russians were able to set everybody free. So if Elie and his father would have waited and chosen to take the risk to stay there, him and his father would have been liberated. Elie just mentions this in essentially one sentence because I imagine it's too difficult to really think about and to try to hash out. If you just would have made one different decision, life could have been so different, and that is just heartbreaking to think about because of all the pain that he still had to endure, taking that 10-mile march to another concentration camp, sleeping in the snow. And he said that he was so cold and in so much pain that the snow felt like a warm blanket. For the snow to feel warm, that is just a very scary time. To wrap everything up, this book is one of the reasons why Elie won the Nobel Peace Prize. And it's so cool that he did because of his experience and his courage to tell this story after everything that was going on. And another awesome piece is that Elie actually came and spoke at Walsh University here in North Canton. That is so cool, and Elie is now on the Peace Wall at my alma mater, and I'm honored to say that he is. I wanted to wait to read this book until I actually was able to travel to Auschwitz, and I did. Last year, I went there with my dad and my brother when I was studying abroad in Ireland, and seeing the conditions that people in the concentration camp had to live in essentially shacks with hard stone floors and planks for beds. It's absolutely deplorable, and it's still hard to fathom that people had even survived there for a year, let alone 6 years in a concentration camp. I was excited to talk about this book and give my summary and my thoughts, but it's much more difficult than I anticipated, simply because all of the emotion that goes on with it and all the unfathomable experiences and pain. It's difficult to imagine how Elie felt even trying to write this book. Night is a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, it's a simple read and you absolutely need to. It's just part of the collection of books that you should read as a human that explains a lot about our human nature and our human history. Elie, thank you for having the courage to fight and the determination to live through all of those insanely disgusting experiences during the Holocaust, and as well as the courage to write this book so that we can help prevent this from ever happening again. And don't you worry, we will never forget, and I'm gonna be doing my little part with this video to make sure that nobody does. This is an intense book, but it's a wonderful book, and it's something you have to read, and hopefully it will shift your perspective on life a little bit. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining me on the first ever episode of the book club where we talked about Night by Elie Wiesel. It's a lovely read, and I hope that you enjoyed it just as much as I did. Be sure to drop your comments below so that we can have a great discussion about it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. I do use Goodreads. It's an app that I categorize all of the books that I want to read, that I am reading, and that I have read. It's essentially a nice little digital library. I'll link my profile below so that you can see the books that I'm going to be reading next, so that maybe you can read those too, and then we can have a nice discussion here on the next episode of the book club. I will see you all then. Thanks for hanging out and talking about such a wonderful book that is Night. I'll see you in the next episode.